I watched my daughter-in-law pour my heart medication down the kitchen sink, her face twisted with satisfaction. What she didn't know was that I'd switched the bottles 2 hours earlier. The pills swirling down the drain were nothing but sugar tablets I'd bought at the pharmacy that morning. My name is Eleanor, and I never imagined I'd become the kind of woman who had to protect herself from her own family. But life has a way of teaching you lessons you never wanted to learn, in classrooms you never asked to enter. It started 6 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other. I was sitting in my living room, the same living room where I'd raised my son Thomas for 32 years, watching the afternoon sun paint golden stripes across the hardwood floors. I'd lived in this house for 40 years. Every creak in the floorboards told a story. Every nick in the kitchen counter held a memory. This wasn't just a house. It was the archive of my entire adult life, the physical manifestation of every choice I'd made, every sacrifice I'd endured, every moment of joy I'd celebrated. The house itself was a modest 2-story colonial in a neighborhood that had gentrified dramatically over the past decade. Daniel and I had bought it in 1985 for $68,000, a stretch for us at the time, with a baby on the way and Daniel's salary as a high school history teacher barely covering our expenses. I remember walking through these empty rooms, 7 months pregnant, painting the nursery a soft yellow because we didn't know if we were having a boy or a girl. Daniel had stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders, and said, "This is where we'll grow old together." He didn't get to grow old. A heart attack took him when he was 51, leaving me a widow at 49 with a son in college and a mortgage that felt insurmountable. But I'd survived. I'd gone back to school myself, gotten my nursing degree, worked double shifts at the hospital until Thomas graduated. I'd kept this house not out of stubbornness, but out of love, for Daniel's memory, for Thomas's childhood, for the version of myself who'd fought so hard to build something stable in an unstable world. Now at 63 I was still here. The house was paid off. My retirement was secure. I volunteered at the same hospital where I'd worked, mentoring new nurses and running support groups for cardiac patients. I had friends, hobbies, a life that felt full and purposeful. I jogged 3 miles every morning along the tree-lined streets of my neighborhood, stopping to chat with neighbors who'd watched Thomas grow up, who remembered Daniel, who'd become the fabric of my daily existence. Thomas had married Vanessa 3 years prior, and I'll admit, I had my reservations from the beginning. Not because she wasn't beautiful. She was stunning, with her perfect blonde hair that never seemed to frizz even in humidity, her designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her practiced smile that showed exactly the right number of teeth. Not because she wasn't successful. She worked in real estate and drove a white BMW that she parked in my driveway like it was claiming territory. My reservations were subtler than that, the kind that make you question your own judgment. Was I being an overprotective mother? Was I jealous of the woman who'd captured my son's heart? Was I one of those terrible mother-in-laws you see in sitcoms, unable to let go? But it was the way she looked at things. My home. Like she was already measuring the space for her own furniture, calculating square footage, assessing property value. She'd walk through my living room and I'd catch her staring at my mother's antique sideboard with an expression that wasn't admiration. It was appraisal. She'd pick up the vintage Tiffany lamp that had been my grandmother's and turn it over, looking for maker's marks in her head. During their engagement, she'd said to me once, "You've kept this place exactly the same for decades, haven't you?" Very nostalgic. The way she said nostalgic made it sound like a diagnosis, a condition that required treatment. But I kept my mouth shut because that's what mothers do when they want to keep their sons close. I smiled at the wedding, held at a country club I'd never heard of with a price tag that made me wince. I welcomed her into our family, gave a speech about gaining a daughter that I'd practiced until it sounded sincere. I pretended not to notice when she started calling Thomas by a pet name, Marky, that made him sound like a child, infantilizing him in a way that seemed designed to make him more pliable. I said nothing when she slowly began isolating him from his friends. First, it was the Thursday night basketball games with his college buddies. "You need to focus on your career," she'd say. "You're not 22 anymore." Then it was the annual fishing trip with his father's old friends, men who'd known Thomas since he was in diapers. "It's our anniversary weekend," she'd remind him, even though their anniversary was in March and the fishing trip was in September. His hobbies disappeared next. Thomas had always been a talented photographer, had even sold a few pieces in local galleries. But Vanessa found the darkroom he'd set up in their apartment's spare bedroom impractical. "We need that space for an office," she said. And the photography equipment ended up in my basement, collecting dust. I watched my vibrant, creative son become smaller, quieter. He started dressing differently. Gone were the flannel shirts and comfortable jeans, replaced by the crisp business casual that Vanessa deemed appropriate for someone on the rise. He stopped telling stories about his day. He laughed less. And when I'd ask if everything was okay, he'd give me a smile that didn't reach his eyes and say, "Everything's great, Mom. Really great." The first real sign that something was deeply wrong came during Sunday dinner. We'd always done Sunday dinners, me, Thomas, and after he got married, Vanessa too. It was tradition, the kind that roots you to your past and gives shape to your weeks. I'd cook Thomas's favorite foods, the comfort meals he'd grown up with. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes. Homemade mac and cheese, the kind with 4 different cheeses and a breadcrumb topping. Apple pie with vanilla ice cream. But that particular Sunday 6 months ago, everything changed. Vanessa set down her fork with a little more force than necessary, the sound sharp against my mother's china. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin, a precise, deliberate gesture, and said, "Eleanor, Thomas and I have been talking." The way she said my name, not Mom, not even Mother Eleanor, just Eleanor, like I was an acquaintance or a business associate, should have been my warning. But I just smiled and waited, my hands folded in my lap, playing the role of the gracious hostess. "We think it would be better if we started hosting Sunday dinners at our place. To make things easier for you. You're not getting any younger. And all this cooking must be exhausting." I was 63. I jogged 3 miles every morning without getting winded. I volunteered at the hospital twice a week, where I was on my feet for hours, providing emotional support to patients and their families. I'd recently taken up watercolor painting and attended a weekly class where I was one of the younger students. I was in better shape than most people half my age, and I certainly wasn't exhausted by cooking a meal I'd been making for decades. But more than the insult to my capabilities, it was the presumption that stung. She hadn't asked if I wanted to give up our tradition. She'd simply announced that she was taking it over, reframing it as a favor to spare my feelings. I swallowed my pride and said, "That's thoughtful of you, dear." Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes. He pushed his pot roast around his plate like a child who'd been scolded, and I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd physically contracted. This wasn't a mutual decision. This was Vanessa's decree, and Thomas was going along with it to keep the peace. The Sunday dinners at their apartment were different in every way that mattered. Their place was sterile, all white walls and minimalist furniture that looked expensive but felt cold. There were no family photos, no mementos, nothing that spoke of history or warmth. The food was catered, always catered, from trendy restaurants that specialized in small portions artfully arranged. Vanessa controlled every conversation, steering topics away from any memory that included me. If I mentioned Thomas's childhood, a funny story about his little league days or the time he tried to build a treehouse and ended up stuck in the branches, Vanessa would laugh in a way that sounded dismissive and say something like, "Oh, Thomas doesn't like talking about his awkward phase." She had a way of making the past sound embarrassing, like Thomas's entire childhood was something to overcome rather than cherish. She'd redirect every conversation to their future plans, the vacation home they'd buy, the renovations they'd make to their apartment, the investment properties they'd acquire. Everything was about accumulation, about building a portfolio, about net worth and market value. There was no room for sentiment in Vanessa's world, no space for anything that couldn't be quantified or monetized. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the invitations became less frequent. Every other week instead of every week. Once a month. Then Vanessa would text, she always texted, never called, to say they were too busy, had other plans, were dealing with work obligations. By the 5th month of their marriage, I was seeing Thomas maybe twice a month, and only when he stopped by my house alone, usually with an apologetic expression that broke my heart. Then came the doctor's appointment that changed everything. I'd been having some irregular heartbeats, nothing dramatic, just occasional palpitations that made me pause during my morning jogs. I'd mentioned it to my doctor during my annual physical, more as a footnote than a concern, but she'd taken it seriously. Dr. Chun was thorough, had known me for years, understood my health history. She'd ordered tests, an EKG, a stress test, a Holter monitor that I wore for 24 hours. The diagnosis was atrial fibrillation, manageable but requiring attention. Dr. Chun prescribed medication, a beta blocker and a blood thinner, and gave me specific instructions. Take it twice daily, same times every day. No skipping doses. Come in for regular blood work to monitor levels. It was straightforward, the kind of chronic condition that millions of people manage successfully. I wasn't scared. I was practical. I mentioned it to Thomas in passing, the way you do when you want your children to know what's happening without worrying them unnecessarily. We were having coffee at my kitchen table, one of his solo visits, and I said, "Oh, by the way, Dr. Chun put me on some heart medication, just to regulate my rhythm. Nothing serious, just something to keep an eye on." Thomas's face had gone pale. "Heart medication? Mom, why didn't you call me right away?" "Because it's not a big deal, honey. People take medication for all sorts of things. I'm fine. Feel fine. This is just preventative." But I could see the worry in his eyes, the same worry I'd seen when he was 7 and thought every cough I had was pneumonia. He'd always been a sensitive child, attuned to my emotional state, terrified of losing me the way he'd lost his father. "Promise me you'll take it exactly as prescribed," he said, gripping my hand across the table. "Promise me you won't forget doses." "I promise, sweetheart. I'm a nurse, remember? I know how important medication compliance is." He'd left that day seeming reassured, but I noticed he'd taken a photo of my medication bottles, told me he'd set reminders on his phone to check in about it. It was sweet in its way, this proof that he still cared, still worried, still saw me as someone worth protecting. 2 weeks later, Vanessa showed up at my door unannounced. It was a Wednesday afternoon around 2 o'clock. I'd just gotten back from my volunteer shift at the hospital and was planning to spend the afternoon in my garden, weeding the rose beds that were my pride and joy. But there she was, standing on my porch in her real estate blazer and carrying a leather folder, looking every bit the professional woman on a mission. "Eleanor, we need to talk about your health," she said, settling herself on my couch without invitation, without asking if this was a good time, without any of the social niceties that normally govern human interaction. I sat across from her in my armchair, Daniel's old chair, worn leather that still held the shape of him, and folded my hands in my lap, waiting. "Thomas is worried sick about you living alone. The heart condition, your age, what if something happens? What if you fall? What if you forget your medication?" She leaned forward, her expression painted with concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. The concern was all in her mouth, not in her gaze, which remained calculating, assessing. "We think it's time to consider other living arrangements." The words hit me like cold water, like that moment when you're swimming and suddenly realize you've gone deeper than you meant to, that the shore is farther away than it seemed. Other living arrangements? A senior community. Nothing sad or depressing, there are wonderful places now like resort living. You'd have people your own age around, activities, medical staff on site 24/7. You'd be safe. You'd have everything you need. She pulled papers out of her folder, brochures for facilities with names like Golden Meadows and Sunrise Manor and Heritage Hills. Safe. The word tasted bitter, like medicine that's supposed to help but makes you feel worse. What she meant was, contained. Managed. Out of the way. I flipped through the brochures with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. The places looked nice enough in the photos, smiling elderly people playing bingo, doing tai chi, sitting in common rooms that looked like hotel lobbies. But I saw past the marketing. I saw the loss of autonomy, the scheduled activities, the communal dining rooms where you couldn't cook your own food or choose your own company. I saw the end of privacy, the surrender of independence, the acknowledgement that your life was winding down, and someone else needed to manage its final chapter. "These are very expensive," I said, noting the price tags tucked discreetly on the back pages. $5,500 a month. $6,000. $7,200 for the premium option. "Well," Vanessa said, and here it came, the real pitch. "It only makes sense that Thomas would inherit this house eventually anyway. Why not now, when you can enjoy not having to worry about maintenance and property taxes and all the stress of homeownership? We could take care of everything. Put the house on the market, handle all the logistics. You wouldn't have to lift a finger." She paused, letting that sink in, then continued with the closer, the line she'd probably practiced. You could even help us with the down payment on the senior community with the equity from the house. We've already had it appraised informally just to get an idea, and properties in this neighborhood are going for $700,000, maybe more. After the sale, you'd have more than enough for the entrance fee and several years of monthly payments. And Thomas and I could finally have a real home, maybe start thinking about children. This house would be perfect for a family. There it was. The real estate agent's pitch. My house wasn't my home to her, it was inventory. An asset. A stepping stone to her next investment. And I was the inconvenient obstacle that needed to be cleared out before the property could reach its full market potential. She'd even had it appraised. Informally, she said, but that meant she'd had someone walk through my home, evaluating it, pricing it, preparing for its sale. Without asking me. Without my permission. With the absolute certainty that I'd agree to this plan, because what else could a 63-year-old woman with a heart condition do but accept the inevitable? I told her I'd think about it, my voice steady even as rage built behind my ribs. She left with a satisfied smile, like a chess player who just captured a queen and was already planning the checkmate 3 moves ahead. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house in the darkness, running my hands along walls that held 40 years of my life. This was where I'd brought Thomas home from the hospital, a tiny bundle who'd fit in the crook of my arm, who changed everything about who I was and what I wanted. Where I'd nursed him through chickenpox and stayed up all night with croup, sitting in the steamy bathroom while he breathed easier. Where I'd helped him with homework at the kitchen table, struggling through algebra together because neither of us was good at math but we were determined to figure it out. This was where I'd celebrated every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. Where Thomas had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where he'd taken prom photos on the front steps, where he'd come home from college for breaks and slept in his old room with his high school trophies still on the shelf, where I'd cried after Daniel died, where I'd learned to cook for 1 instead of 2, where I'd slowly discovered that grief doesn't kill you. It transforms you into someone who can hold more, who understands more, who loves more carefully and more fiercely. This was where I'd rebuilt my life after loss. Where I'd studied for my nursing exams at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Thomas with his homework. Where I'd hosted Thomas's graduation party, his engagement party, where I'd imagined hosting birthday parties for grandchildren who apparently would never visit because their mother wanted me warehoused somewhere convenient. They wanted to erase all of that, pack it into boxes and file it away in some cheerful prison cell with scheduled activities and communal dining and medical staff monitoring my every move. They wanted to turn my life into a liquidated asset, something to be converted to cash and reinvested in their future. I started paying attention after that night. Really paying attention. And once you start looking, once you stop giving people the benefit of the doubt, you see things you've been trained to ignore, patterns you've been conditioned to dismiss as paranoia or imagination. I noticed how Vanessa had a key to my house that I'd never given her. Thomas had a key, of course he'd always had a key, but I'd never given Vanessa one. Which meant she'd either taken Thomas's key and had a copy made, or she'd found my spare, the one I kept hidden under a fake rock in the garden, a hiding place so obvious it had become invisible. She'd stop by when I was out, letting herself in without permission, without even a courtesy text to let me know she was in my home. I'd come back from the hospital or the grocery store and find small things moved. A vase shifted on the mantel. A drawer not quite closed. The kind of changes so subtle you second-guess yourself, wonder if you're misremembering, doubt your own perception. But I wasn't imagining it. I started testing myself, taking photos of rooms before I left, checking them when I returned. And yes, things moved. My mother's china had been shifted in the cabinet, pieces turned to examine maker's marks. The antique jewelry box my grandmother had left me had been opened, items rearranged. Books removed from shelves and not quite returned to their original positions. She was cataloging, inventorying, assessing value, walking through my home like an appraiser, like someone preparing for an estate sale, like I was already gone and she was just doing the preliminary work. I installed a small security camera in my living room, hidden inside a decorative mantel clock that had been Daniel's father's. The kind you can monitor from your phone, that records motion-activated footage to the cloud. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting, that I was becoming one of those suspicious old women who see conspiracy in every shadow. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to review the footage and find nothing, to feel foolish for my suspicions, to laugh at myself for being so melodramatic. I wasn't wrong. The footage showed Vanessa entering my house on a Tuesday morning while I was at my weekly watercolor class. She didn't just walk through, she moved with purpose, with a plan. She photographed everything valuable. My mother's sterling silver tea service. The oil paintings I'd collected over the years, original works by local artists who'd since become sought after. The mid-century modern furniture that Daniel and I had bought at estate sales in the 70s, pieces that were now worth thousands. She opened drawers, rifled through personal papers, examined documents I'd left on my desk. I watched the video 3 times, my heart hammering against my ribs, my hands shaking with something between rage and heartbreak. This wasn't idle curiosity. This was systematic. This was planning. This was a woman who'd already decided I was going to die or be institutionalized, who was preparing for the liquidation of my assets, who was counting money that wasn't hers yet but that she believed was inevitable. But it was what happened next, in footage from the following week, that changed everything. I'd left my medication bottles on the kitchen counter that morning, just the heart pills and my vitamins, nothing dramatic. I was rushing to make it to the hospital on time, and had taken my morning dose but left the bottles out instead of putting them back in the cabinet. A small breach of routine that turned out to be revealing. The footage showed Vanessa entering through the back door this time. She had keys to all the locks now, apparently, and heading straight to the kitchen. She picked up the prescription bottle, read the label carefully, turning it to examine the dosage instructions, the prescribing doctor's name, the pharmacy information. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She looked around, making sure she was alone, and emptied half the pills into her hand. Just stood there staring at them for a long moment. These small white tablets that were keeping my heart rhythm steady. Then she pocketed them, wrapped them in a tissue from the box on my counter and put them in her purse, and left. She stole my medication. I sat in my living room watching that footage over and over until my vision blurred and my chest felt tight, not from my heart condition, but from pure emotional anguish. This wasn't about real estate anymore. This wasn't about inheritance or convenience or convincing me to downsize. My daughter-in-law was tampering with my medication. The implications settled over me like a suffocating blanket. If I started missing doses, and with half my pills missing, I would inevitably miss doses unless I noticed and got a refill early. My condition could worsen. Atrial fibrillation could lead to stroke, could lead to heart failure. It could, if unmanaged, lead to death. And if something happened to me, a heart attack, a stroke, a fatal arrhythmia, it would look natural. Expected, even for a woman my age with a documented heart condition. There would be no investigation, no questions, no suspicion. Just sympathy for poor Thomas, who'd lost his father so young and now his mother too. And Vanessa would be there, the concerned daughter-in-law who tried so hard to convince me to move somewhere safer, who'd warned everyone that I was too stubborn to accept help, who'd done everything she could. Thomas would inherit the house. They'd sell it for $750,000. Clean. Simple. Profitable. Tragic but profitable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to shake Thomas until he woke up and saw what he'd married, saw the calculating predator beneath the beautiful exterior. But I knew better. Without proof beyond the video, which she could claim showed her doing something innocent like checking to make sure I had enough pills, I was just a paranoid old woman. Vanessa would spin it as dementia, as age-related delusion, as the exact reason I needed supervised care. She'd probably use it to speed up the process of having me declared incompetent, of taking control of my finances and my life. So I did what any woman who'd survived 63 years of life's battles would do. I got strategic. I got smart. I became the chess player instead of the pawn. First, I went to my doctor and explained that I was worried about keeping track of my medications. Could she write me a second prescription just in case I lost the first one? I told her I'd been feeling anxious about running out, about missing doses, about my memory. Dr. Chan was sympathetic to an older patient's concerns and agreed immediately, probably relieved that I was taking my health seriously. I filled both prescriptions at different pharmacies, one at the CVS near my house where I'd been going for years, and one at a Walgreens across town where nobody knew me. Then I went to a supplement store, one of those natural health places that sold vitamins and herbal remedies. I bought sugar tablets, the kind people use for homeopathy, that looked remarkably similar to my heart medication. Same size, same general color, close enough that you wouldn't notice unless you examined them very carefully. I took the real medication from my original prescription bottle and hid it in a tampon box under my bathroom sink, the one place I was absolutely certain Vanessa would never look. It was still a box from before menopause, something I'd kept meaning to throw away but hadn't, and now I was grateful for my own procrastination. I emptied the prescription bottle and refilled it with the sugar tablets, exactly the right number to match what should have been left based on how long I'd been taking the medication. Then I left that bottle on the kitchen counter, right where Vanessa would expect to find it. And I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day I took my real medication in secret, hiding in my bathroom like a criminal in my own home, making sure the pills went down with water, checking my pulse to confirm they were working. Every day I left the fake bottle visible, accessible, tempting. I watched Vanessa on my hidden camera, saw her come into my house 3 more times over the next 2 weeks, saw her stare at that bottle with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She never took pills again. She'd already taken enough to create a dangerous gap in my supply. Now she was just waiting, watching for signs that I was deteriorating, that the missed doses were affecting me, that her plan was working. Thomas came by one evening unexpected, and for a moment I thought about telling him everything. Just laying it all out, the surveillance footage, the stolen medication, the systematic campaign to take my home and possibly my life. But when I looked at him, I saw how exhausted he was, how worn down. He'd lost weight. There were circles under his eyes. His hair needed cutting. He looked like someone barely treading water, trying desperately to keep his head above the surface. "Mom, how are you feeling?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. But it was coupled with something else, a kind of resignation, a weariness, like he'd already accepted that I was declining and there was nothing he could do about it. "I'm fine, sweetheart. The medication is working perfectly." He glanced at the pill bottle on my counter, the fake one filled with sugar. "Are you taking it regularly? You can't miss doses with heart medication. It's really important, Mom. Dad died of a heart attack. I can't." His voice broke slightly. "I can't lose you too." The guilt in his eyes almost undid me. He thought he was being a good son, checking on his aging mother, making sure she was taking care of herself. He had no idea his wife was actively working to harm me. "Every single day, honey. Twice a day, just like the doctor ordered. I promise." I pulled him into a hug, felt how thin he'd gotten, how his body trembled slightly with tension he was trying to hide. "Are you okay? You look tired." "I'm fine. Just busy with work. Vanessa's expanding her business and we're looking at some investment properties. It's a lot, but it's good." "It's all good." It wasn't good. I could hear it in his voice, see it in his body language. But he'd been conditioned not to complain, not to express doubt, not to question the narrative Vanessa had constructed about their perfect life and perfect future. He kissed my forehead before leaving, and as the door closed behind him, I felt a crack spider across my heart. She'd gotten to him so completely that he couldn't even see what was happening. She'd isolated him, gaslit him, made him doubt his own perceptions until he couldn't trust anything but her version of reality. 3 weeks after I set my trap, Vanessa made her move. It was a Thursday afternoon, unseasonably warm for late spring. I'd made sure to mention to Thomas that I had a long volunteer shift at the hospital, for hours at least, maybe 5 if they needed extra help in the cardiac wing. I left my house as planned, drove to the hospital, parked in my usual spot. But instead of going inside, I sat in my car, watching the camera feed on my phone. 20 minutes later, Vanessa's white BMW pulled into my driveway. She sat there for a moment, checking her phone, probably making sure I wasn't going to suddenly return home. Then she got out, walked to my back door with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there, and let herself in with her stolen key. I watched her move through my house with purpose. No more pretense of casual visits or concern for my well-being. She went straight to the kitchen, straight to the counter where I'd left the medication bottle. The camera angle was perfect. I could see her face clearly as she picked it up. She examined the bottle, checking how many pills were left. I'd made sure to keep it realistic, removing tablets at the same rate I'd be taking them if this were my real medication. She unscrewed the cap and poured a few into her palm, counting them, doing the math in her head. Satisfied that I'd been taking them regularly, oblivious to the substitution, she made her decision. I'd already started my car and was driving back to my house when I saw, through the camera feed, her walk to the sink. I parked 2 blocks away, didn't want her to hear my car, and walked quickly to my own front door. My hands were steady even though my heart was racing. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. I opened my front door as quietly as possible and moved through the hallway toward the kitchen. I could hear water running. When I reached the doorway, I stopped and watched. Vanessa stood at my sink, the medication bottle in one hand, watching intently as white pills swirled down the drain. She'd turned the water on high, making sure every single tablet dissolved or washed away completely. Her face held an expression I'd never seen before, satisfaction mixed with something darker, something that looked almost like pleasure. She was enjoying this, enjoying the power, enjoying what she believed was the final move in a game she'd been playing since the day she met my son. She ran the water for a long time, making sure every trace was gone, that there would be no evidence of what she'd done. Then she rinsed the empty bottle, dried it with a dish towel, and set it back on the counter exactly where she'd found it. "Those were expensive," I said from the doorway. Vanessa spun around so fast she almost dropped the bottle. Her face cycled through shock, fear, confusion, and then settled on indignant anger, the default emotion of people caught doing something they know is wrong. "Eleanor, you scared me. I thought you were at the hospital." Her hand went to her chest in an exaggerated gesture of surprise. "Clearly." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed, my voice steady. I'd practiced this moment in my head 100 times, rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd say it. "Want to explain why you're pouring my heart medication down the sink?" She recovered quickly. I had to give her that. Her face rearranged itself into concern, that practiced expression of caring that had fooled my son for 3 years. "I was trying to help. I came by to check on you. I was worried because you hadn't answered Thomas's text, and I saw these pills sitting out. The bottle said they expired last month. I didn't want you taking expired medication. Could be dangerous. It could make you sick." I walked to the counter and picked up the empty bottle, examining the label with exaggerated care, turning it slowly so she could see what I was seeing. "That's interesting, because the expiration date clearly says next year. April 2026. Want to try again?" Her smile faltered for just a second, a crack in the perfect facade. "Well, I must have misread it. These things are printed so small. The point is, I was trying to help. I was worried about you. Like you helped yourself to my house key? Like you helped yourself to cataloging my valuables? Like you've helped convince Thomas that I'm too old and feeble to live in my own home? Like you helped yourself to half my pills 3 weeks ago. I don't know what you're talking about." But her voice had gone sharp, defensive, the mask slipping. I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward her. The security footage played, crystal clear, showing her entering my house unauthorized, photographing my belongings, and in one particularly damning clip from 3 weeks earlier, removing pills from my medication bottle and pocketing them. All the color drained from her face. She looked like she might be sick or faint or both. "You've been stealing my medication," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest, despite the hurt that threatened to crack my composure, creating a situation where I might miss doses, where my heart condition could worsen. "Were you hoping I'd have an attack? That it would look natural? That you and Thomas could inherit this house without the inconvenience of having to wait for me to die naturally? That's insane." She took a step back, putting the kitchen island between us. "You're paranoid. This is exactly why you need supervised care. You're seeing conspiracies that don't exist. This is mental illness, Eleanor. You need help." "The pills you just poured down the drain were sugar tablets," I said, cutting through her panic with cold precision. "I've been taking my real medication all along. I just wanted to see what you'd do. I wanted to know if my suspicions were right, or if I really was just a paranoid old woman." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, her prepared excuses dying before they could form. She looked like an animal that had just realized it was trapped in a corner with no escape route. "You set me up," she finally whispered. "I protected myself," I corrected. "There's a difference. A significant one. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my house. You're going to give me back my key, yes, all the copies you made. And you're going to tell Thomas the truth about your little campaign to get me out of my home. Or what?" She tried to sound defiant, but her voice shook. You'll show him that video? He'll never believe you. I'll tell him you doctored it, that you're having delusions, that this is just more proof you can't live independently. He trusts me, Eleanor. He loves me. And you? You're just his difficult mother who can't accept that he's grown up and moved on. Or I'll call the police and file a report for breaking and entering, theft and tampering with prescription medication. That last one is a felony, Vanessa. A serious felony. I checked with a lawyer friend, Patricia Collins. She's practiced for 30 years, very sharp woman. She said tampering with someone's medication with intent to cause harm could carry a prison sentence of 5 to 10 years. And then I'll make sure every real estate office in the city knows exactly what kind of person you are. I'll post this video on every local Facebook group, every neighborhood watch forum, every community board. Your career would be over before the week is out. No one wants to work with a realtor who tried to kill her mother-in-law for a house. Her perfectly made-up face contorted with hatred, with rage, with the kind of fury that comes from being outmaneuvered by someone you underestimated. You bitter old woman. You can't stand that Thomas chose me, that he has a life that doesn't revolve around you, that he's happy without you. Thomas didn't choose you, I said quietly, and this was the part that hurt most to say aloud, to acknowledge. You chose my house, my assets, the life you thought you could steal. My son was just the key to the door. If he'd been poor, if he'd been working minimum wage with no prospects of inheritance, you never would have looked at him twice. He was never the prize. This house was the prize. She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp and angry, barely controlled. As she moved toward the door, I called after her. Vanessa. She turned, her hand on the doorknob, her body vibrating with barely suppressed rage. If you're even half as smart as you think you are, you'll tell Thomas you want a divorce before he figures out who you really are. It'll be easier for everyone. You might even walk away with something. He's generous to a fault. But if you try anything, if you go near him or me or this house again, if you try to spin this or manipulate the narrative, I'll make sure that video ends up everywhere. The police, the internet, every person you've ever met. Do we understand each other? She left without answering, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames on the walls, hard enough that I heard picture glass crack somewhere in the hallway. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after she left, shaking. Not from fear, the fear had passed, but from adrenaline and something deeper, something more profound. A sadness that went beyond words. This was what my life had become. I had to play chess with my own son's wife just to keep the home where I'd raised him. I had to set traps and gather evidence and prepare for legal battles just to maintain my right to exist in my own space, on my own terms. I called Patricia that evening, my lawyer friend, the woman who'd helped me navigate Daniel's death, who'd reviewed my will, who'd become family over the years. I told her everything, showed her the footage, explained the medication tampering, described the campaign to institutionalize me. She watched the videos 3 times, her expression growing darker with each viewing. Eleanor, this is serious, she said finally. This isn't just family drama. This is criminal. You need to file a police report. I want Thomas protected first, I said. I need to know he's safe, that he understands what happened, before any of this becomes public. Call him, Patricia said. Call him right now. He needs to know what his wife tried to do. But I didn't call him that night. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to break this news to my son without destroying him completely. Because that's what this would do, it would shatter everything he believed about his marriage, his judgment, his life. Thomas showed up at my door 2 days later, on Saturday morning. I knew from his face that Vanessa had told him some version of events. He looked exhausted, aged in a way that made my heart ache. Mom, we need to talk. I made coffee, real coffee, the good kind Daniel had loved, the kind I saved for important moments, and we sat at the kitchen table where I'd helped him with his algebra homework 25 years ago, where we'd planned his college applications, where we'd toasted his engagement with champagne I couldn't really afford but bought anyway because that's what mothers do. Vanessa says you accused her of trying to hurt you, that you have security cameras and think she's stealing from you. Mom, I'm worried about you. This kind of paranoia, these delusions. Thomas. I reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand I'd held when he was born, when he learned to walk, when he got his first scraped knee. I need you to listen to me. Really listen like you used to before you met her. Can you do that? Something in my voice, in my eyes, must have reached him, reached past Vanessa's conditioning, past the narrative she'd constructed, because he stopped talking and just nodded. I told him everything. Not angrily, not dramatically, just the facts. The unauthorized key. The inventory of my belongings. The pressure to sell my house and move to assisted living. The missing medication. The systematic campaign to make me seem incompetent, unreliable, in need of supervision. And finally I showed him the footage. We sat in silence as he watched. I saw his face cycle through denial, confusion, anger, and finally, a devastating understanding that seemed to age him before my eyes. When the clip showed Vanessa pocketing my pills, he actually flinched, his whole body recoiling from the screen. When the video ended, with footage of her pouring the pills down the drain just days earlier, he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, his jaw working, his eyes wet. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I swear to God I didn't know." "I know you didn't, honey. She told me." He stopped, swallowed hard, started again. "She told me you were getting forgetful. That you'd mentioned not being sure if you'd taken your medication. She said she was worried about you being alone, that we needed to help you transition to somewhere safer before something terrible happened. She made it sound like love. Like we were protecting you." "I know. I thought I was being a good son." His voice broke completely. "I thought I was helping you. You are a good son, Thomas. That's exactly why she was able to manipulate you. She used your love for me as a weapon. She used your fear of losing me, the same fear you've had since your dad died, and she weaponized it. That's what narcissists do. They find the thing you love most, and they twist it into something that serves them." He sat there for a long moment, staring at his coffee cup, and I watched him process everything. Every conversation with Vanessa, every decision, every moment of doubt he dismissed as his own paranoia or inadequacy. I watched him reconstruct his entire marriage through this new lens, and it was like watching someone's heart break in slow motion. "She wants me to ask you for money," he said suddenly. "For her business expansion. $150,000. She said it would be a good investment, that you could make it back in a year. She had projections, charts, a whole presentation. I told her I wouldn't ask, that it wasn't appropriate. But she kept pushing. She said you'd want to help, that it's what parents do, that you'd be insulted if we didn't include you in our plans." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just getting me out of the way. She wanted to drain my assets while I was still alive, then inherit whatever was left. The senior facility would have eaten up my savings within a few years. She'd positioned herself to get everything, my home, my savings, my life's work, all wrapped up in the language of care and family, and helping me enjoy my golden years. "What are you going to do?" I asked gently, already knowing but needing him to say it aloud, to claim his own agency. "I called a lawyer yesterday morning," he said, meeting my eyes for the first time since we'd started talking. "Even before I came here, before I saw this footage. Something about the way she told me about your confrontation just felt wrong. The story didn't add up. She was too rehearsed, too prepared. And I realized I didn't believe her anymore. I don't think I've believed her for a long time, but I didn't want to admit it." He paused, gathering himself. "I'm filing for divorce. I already moved my things out. I'm staying at Jason's place, sleeping on his couch. I didn't know how deep this went, but I knew I couldn't stay married to someone who would hurt you. Even before I saw this video, I knew." I squeezed his hand, pride mixing with heartbreak. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Don't be. You were protecting yourself. I should have protected you. I should have seen what she was." He wiped his eyes with his free hand. "Can I stay here for a while? Just until I figure things out? I know it's asking a lot after everything. This is your home, Thomas. It always has been. It always will be." The divorce was uglier than anyone could have predicted. Vanessa fought for everything, the house she'd never lived in but claimed to have invested emotional energy in, my retirement accounts she'd never contributed to, even the savings bonds I'd bought Thomas when he was a baby, the ones I'd been planning to give to his future children. She painted herself as the victim, the devoted daughter-in-law who'd only wanted to help an elderly woman in decline, who'd been accused of terrible things by a paranoid mother who couldn't accept her son's happiness. She hired an expensive lawyer, someone known for scorched earth tactics. She tried to get statements from my doctors suggesting cognitive decline. She contacted my neighbors, fishing for stories about my forgetfulness or erratic behavior. She even showed up at the hospital where I volunteered, trying to speak with staff members about my mental state, my reliability, my fitness to live independently. But she'd underestimated me. More importantly, she'd underestimated what a mother will do to protect her child, even when that child is 32 years old. Patricia helped Thomas build an airtight case. The security footage, of course, was the centerpiece. But beyond that, we had the timeline of manipulation documented through text messages and emails. We had testimony from Thomas's friends about how Vanessa had systematically isolated him. We had the pharmacist who confirmed that someone matching Vanessa's description had come in asking unusual questions about my medication, when I took it, what would happen if doses were missed, whether there were any food interactions that could make it less effective. We had my medical record showing no cognitive decline, no memory issues, no signs of the incompetence Vanessa had been describing. We had statements from the hospital staff about my volunteer work, my reliability, my mental sharpness. We had testimony from my watercolor instructor, my neighbors, my book club, all the people who made up the fabric of my daily life, and who could attest that I was healthy, independent, and completely capable of managing my own affairs. Most damningly, we had the footage from the day she poured the medication down the drain. Patricia had it analyzed by a forensics expert who confirmed the timestamp, verified it hadn't been edited or doctored, and provided a detailed report about what the footage showed. It was evidence of tampering with prescription medication, of criminal intent, of attempted harm. The judge was not sympathetic to Vanessa's claims. In the end, she got nothing except a reputation that followed her like a shadow. The divorce was finalized 6 months after Thomas filed. The real estate company quietly let her go after word spread through the office. Apparently she pulled similar manipulation tactics with elderly clients, convincing them to sell their homes for below market value, pocketing commissions while promising to help them find appropriate senior housing that never materialized. Thomas heard through mutual friends that she'd moved to another city, probably to start fresh where nobody knew her story. I hoped she'd learned something, but I suspected she'd just become more careful, more subtle in her predation. Thomas lived with me for 8 months, and those months healed both of us in ways I hadn't expected. We cooked Sunday dinners together again, experimenting with new recipes and laughing at our failures. We talked late into the night, really talked about his marriage, about the ways he'd been manipulated, about how he'd lost himself trying to become the person Vanessa wanted him to be. We worked in the garden together, planting new roses to replace the ones that hadn't survived the winter. He apologized more times than necessary. I forgave him more than he probably deserved because that's what mothers do. Not because the pain wasn't real, but because love is larger than pain, and because I understood that he'd been a victim too of manipulation, of gaslighting, of systematic psychological abuse designed to make him doubt his own perceptions and judgment. We learned to trust each other again, to rebuild what Vanessa had tried to dismantle. And slowly I watched him become himself again, the creative, thoughtful, compassionate man I'd raised. He started photography again, setting up a small darkroom in the basement where his equipment had been gathering dust. He reconnected with his old friends, went back to Thursday night basketball games, took that annual fishing trip he'd missed for 3 years. He started laughing again, the real kind of laughter that comes from joy rather than obligation. He has his own place now, a small condo downtown that he's slowly making his own, filling with his photography and plants he's learning to keep alive and furniture he chose himself instead of having someone else dictate his taste. He comes for Sunday dinner every week alone and happy to be so. We've talked about relationships, about red flags, about the difference between love and control. He's in therapy, working through the manipulation he experienced, learning to trust his own judgment again. He's dating someone new, a kind woman named Sophie who works as a librarian and brings me flowers and asks about my volunteer work, and has never once suggested I should live anywhere but right here in my home. Sophie has dinner with us sometimes, and I watch the way she interacts with Thomas, the respect, the genuine interest in his thoughts, the way she encourages his photography instead of dismissing it. She's met his friends, goes to basketball games with him, seems genuinely happy when he's happy rather than needing to control his happiness. It's early still, but I see something real there, something healthy. As for me, I'm still in my house, still jogging my 3 miles every morning through streets I've known for 40 years. Still volunteering at the hospital, where I've just started a new support group for family members of cardiac patients. Still taking my heart medication, the real stuff, twice a day without fail. Still living my life on my terms, in my space, surrounded by memories that matter. The security cameras are still up though. Some lessons you don't unlearn. Some precautions become part of your life not because you're paranoid, but because you're realistic about human nature and the lengths some people will go to for money and property. I think about Vanessa sometimes, usually late at night when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts. I wonder if she ever thinks about what she did, if she feels any remorse, or if she's just angry that she got caught. I wonder if she's trying the same tricks on someone else, some other elderly person, some other trusting family, or if seeing her plans crumble taught her anything about the cost of greed. Mostly, though, I think about the woman I had to become to survive her. I never imagined I'd be someone who set traps, who documented evidence, who played the long game with such cold calculation. It wasn't who I wanted to be. It wasn't the person I thought I'd become in my 60s, but it was who I needed to be, and I'm not ashamed of that anymore. There's a strength in survival that nobody tells you about when you're young. It's not pretty or noble. It doesn't feel empowering in the moment. It feels like exhaustion, like constant vigilance, like sleeping with one eye open. It feels like becoming hard in places you wanted to stay soft, like developing calluses on your heart. But on the other side of it, when you're standing in your kitchen making coffee in the morning sunlight, in the home you fought to keep, with your son coming for dinner that night and your life still your own, that's when you understand what you're made of. I learned that family isn't always blood, and blood isn't always family. I learned that love can be weaponized, but so can awareness. I learned that sometimes the most radical act of self-preservation is simply refusing to disappear when someone wants you gone. And I learned that being underestimated is a gift, maybe the greatest gift someone can give you. Vanessa saw an old woman, an obstacle, a resource to be extracted and discarded. She never saw the warrior who'd buried a husband too young and rebuilt her life from grief. She never saw the nurse who'd held the hands of dying patients and learned that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to keep moving forward despite it. She never saw the mother who'd raised a son alone and would do anything, become anything, to protect him. She saw someone past their prime, past their usefulness, past their power. And that miscalculation was her downfall. The sugar tablets are still in my medicine cabinet, a reminder of the day I chose to fight back instead of becoming a victim. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, remembering the feeling of watching Vanessa pour them down the sink, thinking she was destroying my lifeline. The satisfaction on her face, the calculated cruelty of it, the absolute certainty that she'd won. And then I remember the look on her face when I told her what she'd really destroyed. Nothing. She'd destroyed nothing but her own future, her own carefully constructed plans, her own greedy dreams of inheritance and profit. That's the thing about trying to poison someone's life. You'd better make sure you know what you're really pouring down the drain. You'd better make sure the person you're targeting hasn't already thought 5 moves ahead. You'd better make sure you're not underestimating someone whose survival instincts are sharper than your predatory ones. Did I do the right thing? Some people have told me I should have gone straight to the police, that I should have exposed her immediately, that I should have protected other potential victims by making her crimes public from the start. Others have said I was too harsh, that I should have given her a chance to explain, to apologize, to change. That I should have tried to preserve Thomas's marriage instead of contributing to its destruction. But I know what I know. I've lived long enough to trust my instincts, to recognize predators, to understand that some people aren't capable of change because they don't believe they've done anything wrong. Vanessa wasn't going to change. She was going to escalate. She'd already moved from manipulation to theft to medication tampering. What would have come next if I hadn't stopped her? How far would she have gone? And if I hadn't stopped her, I might not be here to tell this story. I might be one of those tragic obituaries, elderly woman dies of heart attack, survived by devoted son and daughter-in-law, services pending. The house would have sold within months. Vanessa would have gotten exactly what she wanted. And nobody would have known the truth. So yes, I did the right thing. I did the only thing. I protected myself and my son. I made sure a woman who saw elderly people as obstacles learned that we still have teeth, still have fight, still have the capacity to outsmart those who underestimate us. And I kept my home, not just the building but everything it represents. My history, my independence, my autonomy. My right to live my life on my terms until the very end, however that end comes. Would you have done the same? Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone who was supposed to be family? Have you ever been manipulated by someone who used your love as a weapon, your fear as a tool, your trust as a doorway to exploitation? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And your stories help me know I'm not alone in this strange, complicated journey of survival and strength. Your experiences matter. Your battles matter. Your victories matter, even the small ones, even the ones nobody else sees. Which part of my story resonated with you most? Was it the moment I realized what she was doing, or the moment I chose to fight back? Maybe it was watching Thomas wake up to the truth, or the quiet victory of still being here, still standing, still living in my own home on my own terms. What would you have done differently? What would you have done the same? These are the questions that keep me up sometimes, the endless rehashing of choices and consequences, the wondering if there was a better way, a kinder way, a way that didn't require me to become so calculated and cold. But then morning comes and I'm still here, still jogging my 3 miles, still making coffee in my kitchen, still living my life. And I remember that survival isn't pretty, but it's necessary. That protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. That becoming hard when you need to be hard doesn't mean you've lost your softness. It means you've learned when to show it and when to shield it. Don't forget to subscribe for more life stories like this. Real experiences from real women who refused to be erased, who fought back when fighting back was the only option, who learned that age doesn't mean powerlessness and vulnerability, doesn't mean victimhood. We're stronger than they think, wiser than they assume, and far more dangerous than they imagine when they threaten what we love. We're the grandmothers and mothers and aunts who've survived everything life threw at us and came out the other side still standing. We're the women who learned to play chess when others thought we only knew how to be pawns. And we're still here, still telling our stories, still refusing to disappear. With love and respect, Auntie Helen Stories.